I remember the smell of the office before sunrise, burnt espresso, printer toner, floor cleaner with its lemon bravado that never fooled anyone. The city was a blurred charcoal drawing outside the glass. Rain stippling the windows and beating on the ledge like a string of small failures. I came in early as I always did, to be alone with the humming servers and the dim corridor lights that clicked awake in sequence, one after another, as if I were lighting a runway. My badge chirped. The lobby was a mirror that kept pretending to be a view. I warmed my hands on paper cups and listened to the storm. A draft curled beneath our conference room door, lifting a corner of a forgotten agenda. The receptionist would arrive later. The chatter about campaigns and conversions and what are we selling today would arrive later. For those few hours, I was an island, a woman held together by habit and a to-do list, a neat ponytail, a plain gold ring I still wore though the name attached to it had long ago untied itself from me. That morning I revised a presentation for the technology division, a rollout plan I'd spent weeks coaxing into clarity. 2 years earlier, I'd left a smaller agency after my marriage ended, promising myself I'd keep my head down and become the sort of person who rarely surprised anyone. Competent, predictable, unmessy. I liked the discipline of it. I liked being the steady pair of hands in a company that boasted about moonshots and thought nothing of launching 5 kites into a lightning storm just to see which would catch. Our new CEO had been in the building for 15 days. He came from a world of private jets and turnaround legends, his name passed around the industry with a hush that suggested both admiration and relief that he belonged to someone else's story. We'd met once briefly, when he toured the floor and shook the right hands. He noted the whiteboards, admired a mock-up, asked a question that was either simple or ruthless, depending on how you answered it. When his gaze found me, he was polite, brisk. He said my last name the old-fashioned way, with respect stitched into the syllables. I learned later that he was divorced too. People said his was a mutual ending, no rancor. People say a lot when someone new arrives, trying to stitch a person into a patchwork of rumor and hope. By 8:30 the office had a pulse. Umbrellas dripped at the door, and the elevator hummed, and an intern panicked over a jammed stapler as if it were a bomb. I met with legal, rescheduled a vendor call, sent notes to my team. At 9, just as I reached for a second coffee, my phone buzzed with a meeting request. The sender was him. No details, just a time, 10 o'clock, and a location, his corner office, the one with the curved glass, and the view that made the rest of us glance at our shoes before stepping inside. I brought the rollout deck. The rain had grown insistent, rattling the panes like a child asking to come in. He stood with his hands in his pockets and the skyline at his shoulders, tie loosened as if he'd wrestled an early crisis and won. He didn't gesture toward a chair. He didn't need to. I understood meetings like these are as much choreography as conversation. I sat. He remained standing. He said my name, attempted a half smile that never reached warmth, and thanked me for coming. He spoke carefully. Every word fitted like brick into mortar, about a breach, an internal leak that had sent half-baked numbers into a journalist's hands. The article had appeared late the night before. A cobbled piece heavy on speculation, light on mercy, suggesting we plan to cut a product line and use layoffs to finance a marketing push. HR was furious. Investors were rattled. Legal was sharpening knives. He slid a printed email across the desk, a chain that ended with my name. My throat went cold. It was a snippet of a message I had sent weeks ago to my team, an internal note describing potential scenarios. Harmless in context, inflammatory if you divorced it from everything around it. The timestamp was mine. The words were mine. The forward was not. He said I knew our policy. He said appearances mattered. He said it with a steadiness that made it worse. I started to explain how easily words travel once they've been freed from the husk of their meaning. I described the revised plan, the guardrails I'd set, the warning I'd delivered in the note itself that nothing was final. But he shook his head slowly, as if he and I were standing on opposite shores of a river that would not be bridged today. He told me that leadership was expected to fall on swords. He said I was one of the few who could afford to, because I would land on my feet. Competent, predictable, unnecessary. He used language that scattered responsibility like rain. He said he didn't doubt my integrity. He said he regretted the timing. He said he had no choice. He used my last name like a bandage, neat and sterile. He informed me that HR would finalize the paperwork by noon, that I would receive a severance package that respected my tenure and contributions, and that he expected a clean transition with dignity on all sides. I surprised myself by nodding. I surprised myself by standing. I surprised myself by swallowing the sound that tried to claw up my throat. I remember the way the conference room glass across the hall caught my reflection as I walked out, a woman in a dark blazer whose face had folded into something unreadable, like a letter that had been opened and then smoothed, hoping no one would notice the crease. The gossip grazed my shoulders like static all the way to my desk. I kept my voice low when I told my team. I told them to keep their heads down, to deliver the rollout because the company mattered and their work mattered, and this was not the time to fix anything with a blowtorch. My closest colleague offered to walk me out. I shook my head. I packed my carefully neutral things into a conference tote. Water bottle, notebook, charger, the little ceramic dish where I kept paper clips like bright metal candies. I brushed a hand over the back of my chair as if it were a dog I was leaving behind. When I reached the lobby, the receptionist wasn't at her desk. A jazz station played quietly somewhere, a saxophone like a sigh. The rain had turned into something steadier, less argumentative. I stepped out without an umbrella and let it take me, the storm licking at my collar and trickling under my cuffs. I went home by a crooked route that let me avoid every corner where I might recognize myself. It was not the first time a door had closed behind me. I had once watched a man I loved pack his life into boxes with fierce, careful hands, as if he were moving out of a museum he had curated but never visited. We had been polite until the end and even past it. I had not learned how to plead. By evening the rain paused. The city threw off steam and the pavements shone. Car lights smeared into long ribbons. I changed into a sweater that belonged to no particular outfit, poured tea and didn't drink it, and set my severance packet beside the stack of mail that announced itself as very important before collapsing into a heap of advertisements. My hands shook once and then forgot. When the doorbell rang, I thought it was a neighbor. Our building had thin walls and a talent for misdelivered packages. I opened to a delivery man holding a narrow glass vase heavy with deep, almost black roses. The card slid free. No name on the envelope, just my address and the handwriting that didn't try to disguise itself with flourishes. Inside, a single sentence. I did the wrong thing the right way, and it feels like a lie. I stared at the flowers until the rain began again, softer this time, a curtain instead of a drum. I told myself that this was what powerful men did. They softened blows with gestures that looked like conscience. I put the roses on my kitchen table and turned off the light, and the blooms absorbed the darkness, the room smelling like a secret I didn't want. That night I slept 4 hours and dreamed I was standing inside an elevator that rose without buttons, my reflection multiplying in the brushed steel until it became a crowd. In the morning, I woke to a city that had been rinsed and wrung. The silence in my apartment had the stubborn quality of a closed book. The first week was paperwork and conversations with recruiters who used energetic synonyms for pause. A former client texted me a question and then apologized when she remembered I wasn't there anymore. My mother left a voicemail that began with a sigh and ended with a recipe. I bought a journal with a heavy spine and wrote down the hours I didn't want to lose between coffee and dusk. On the fifth day, an email arrived from an anonymous address that was not actually anonymous. It asked if I would meet at a cafe on the east side with a green awning and a case of pastries that had been praised online with a fervor usually reserved for religious relics. He suggested noon, when the lunch crowd might turn our table into an island. He wrote that he would understand if I didn't come. I told myself I was going to decline. Then I glanced at my apartment's careful neatness and the way time had begun to open its jaws. I wrote that I would be there. The cafe was warm enough to fog my glasses. Espresso steam rose like weather. He sat at a corner table with a coffee he had not drunk and a pastry he had not tasted. He stood when I approached, a habit that made me bristle and soften at the same time. He said he was grateful. He said my name the way a person says a word that must not be mispronounced. He told me what I already knew, that a board member had panicked, that the leak was part rumor, part sabotage, that cutting me loose had given legal an easy story to hand the press. He told me that if he had fought for me, he would have drawn attention where attention was already burning holes. He believed in triage. He said it as if the word consoled him. I asked him whether belief consoled me. He didn't answer. He looked very tired. He looked like a man who had been brave in the wrong rooms. He said he would write me a letter that could open doors. He said he would call people he'd rather not owe favors to. He said he was sorry. He meant it in the way men in clean suits mean it when they choose the cleanest mess and hope everyone else will understand the geometry later. I told him that I didn't want favors. I wanted the original geometry, cause and effect, argument and answer, the proof on the whiteboard that showed the steps, not the solution scribbled at the bottom. He reached for his coffee and didn't drink it. He made a small confession then, one he seemed to fear as much as he believed it necessary. He had read everything he could find with my name on it after the firing. He had read old memos and new plans and a note I'd sent to myself that lived in a public folder by accident, a checklist for a weekend that included laundry and oil changes and calling my mother. He had recognized a woman who cleaned up after other people and pretended that was the whole point of being in the room. He said he wanted to be the sort of leader who could keep someone like me, but he also wanted to be the man who would be worthy of it. He saw the contradiction. He had chosen the company. He wondered if he had chosen wrong. The cafe had one small window that didn't fog. Out of it the street shimmered with an oil slick's iridescence, a rainbow trying to become a bruise. He asked if he could tell me something that was not strategy. He said that when I'd left his office that day, it had felt like a door closing where a window should have been, and the sound had seemed final in a way that made his lungs misbehave. He had sent the roses because apology felt too narrow. He had wanted to send something living that might persuade me to consider nuance. He knew how arrogant that sounded. I said that nuance had been used like a shield against me. He nodded because the sentence deserved a nod, even if it cut him. We were both quiet, the cafe's plates clinking and voices rising and falling like tide. He asked if I would humor him with one more question. If he cleared my name, truly and publicly, would that matter? Or had we already used up the good porcelain of our professional respect and dropped the rest? I said it would matter. I said what mattered more was not the announcement but the choice behind it, the willingness to be seen mid-course, adjusting. He took that in like a prescription. The next week, the company issued a statement that took its time with words. It credited the breach to a third-party vendor's misconfigured portal and apologized for any confusion. It spoke about my exemplary leadership and my commitment to ethical planning. The press, hungry for news stories, chewed that one briefly and moved on. My inbox warmed. He sent me a link to the statement with a note as simple as a folded napkin. I thanked him. We exchanged messages that became less about work than about the shape of days. He told me he ran at night to tire the part of his brain that wouldn't sit down. I told him that my mother played old records when she cleaned, and that the needle skated across dust the way memory skates across certain hours. He told me he used to go to a lake as a boy and lie on the dock with his ear pressed to the boards, listening to water knocking. I did not tell many people I was seeing him privately. It was not seeing precisely. It was not work precisely either. It was something that needed corridors and low light and the permission to leave sentences unfinished. We met twice more, always at odd hours. Once it was the lobby of a hotel where conferences went to posture. Once it was the park at dusk, where joggers ghosted past and the air smelled like mulch and damp. He carried himself like a man who could not be surprised by his own decisions, and yet I saw surprise flicker in him when he laughed. The third meeting was after 9 on a Wednesday in his office, at his invitation. The building had shed the day's noise. The cleaning crew moved like a tide in sensible shoes. He stood by the window again, but this time he gestured to the chair like a man asking for a particular kind of patience. He told me what I had not expected to hear, that he had found the leak's author, someone from finance who'd felt both overlooked and overcorrected. The person had framed my email because I was known to be careful, and careful people make such tidy scapegoats. Legal wanted discretion, HR wanted repentance, the board wanted numbers. He had navigated all three with the old choreography and then set the last step to a new rhythm. The person would leave the company quietly. He would not say more. He said there was another conversation he did not know how to script. He said that if he asked the question he wanted to ask, he would become a cliché, and he was too old to be flippant with clichés. We looked at each other for a long moment that felt like the suspended part of a song before the beat resumes. He said he had not been sleeping. He said he had been imagining what my presence would have done for the next year of the company, and what my presence had already done to his sense of himself. He said he had not planned to feel tenderness when he hired me, or when he fired me, or when he apologized. He had planned for control. He did not give himself points for it anymore. The rain began again. It slid down the curved glass in quiet sheets, patient, committed. The city's lights swam. He moved closer, not enough to call it improper, enough to make the air between us warm. He didn't touch me. He told me I had changed how he listened. He told me my steadiness had a gravity he had mistaken, at first, for compliance. He had never admired compliance. He found himself admiring me. I asked him what a man like him did with admiration. He said he was learning. He said he wanted to ask me to stay. He said he wouldn't, because staying would cost me more than it would give me. He made a confession then that required 2 breaths. He wanted to see me, truly see me, beyond the walls that had held us. He wanted to ask for a dinner that wasn't a cover, and a walk that wasn't a loophole, and a night's conversation that didn't end because policy demanded it. He was asking for permission to be a person, not a role. He recognized the absurdity, given the way we had met last. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. I noticed the scent of my perfume warming under the office lights. I noticed the angle of his shoulders, the looseness there that had not existed the first day I stood in this room. I told him that on the morning he fired me, he had looked as if he had built an altar to reason, and then the altar had turned around and refused to bless him. I had been the lamb. We were both there to remember it. I told him that if we were to sit across a table without shame, he would have to know that my life had a geography that didn't run through him. He said he wanted that. He asked if I could believe him. We stood very close then, with the rain holding its breath for us. He reached out, and I felt his fingertips at my sleeve, barely an idea of a touch, the sort of pressure that could be denied later if we needed it to be. His voice dropped, roughened by restraint. The space between us became smaller than a heartbeat. The elevator hummed somewhere distant, a machine remembering. The city made its indifferent sounds. I knew what would happen if either of us moved, and I moved anyway. I don't narrate the rest, because it belongs to the space where words fade to the kind of quiet that is its own planet. The night didn't transform us into anything we weren't. It revealed the dignity of wanting and the courage of holding back enough to keep respect whole. When I left, he didn't ask me to stay. When I reached the sidewalk, the rain had cleared and the streetlights gentled everything. I walked until my breath steadied. In the weeks that followed, I took a contract elsewhere, a mid-size firm that handled fewer flames with more water. The name on the door didn't dazzle anyone, which suited me. I arrived early and stood in their kitchen with a cup warming my hands, listening to the hum of someone else's building. I pitched a strategy I believed in. I helped a junior associate shape her thoughts into something she recognized. The days stitched themselves together, plain and honest and good. He and I met without sneaking. A restaurant on the edge of the arts district, where the lighting was flattering and the waiters looked like sculptors. A museum on a weekday afternoon, strolling through an exhibit of textile art that made us both quiet. A bookshop with a cat that seemed to belong to no one and everyone. His hand would find the small of my back without claiming more than steadiness. He learned the names of my favorite streets. I learned the point at which he had to stop mid-sentence to look out a window and reset his thoughts. We were careful, which is a word that can mean cold if you've never had to earn it. It did not mean cold for us. It meant we were measuring with a ruler that extended beyond a single season. We did not talk much about the day he fired me. When we did, he did not offer a new version with sharper edges or softer light. He offered the same one, held more gently. He said he could not undo it. He said he would spend a portion of his future learning what it meant to live with that, and also asked to be seen anew. I told him that regret isn't useful unless it helps you hold a door next time. He nodded like a student. There was a crisis, as there always is, and it came calling in his world first. A partner tried to sell an announcement ahead of time to goose a short position. The board was half complicit and half furious in the way a body can become angry at its own limbs. He called me late, not from the office but from the street, the sound of distant sirens drifting past his words. He asked me what to do. It felt like a strange gift, that he would ask not for absolution, but for strategy that included a moral weather forecast. I told him to name the wrongdoing precisely, to keep the nouns heavy and the adjectives few. Told him to save the public for later and start with the people who had given him their mornings. I told him to stand in a conference room and say the sort of thing that cost him, to allow himself to be seen thinking rather than polished. He asked me if I would come. I said I would sit in the back row and listen. He said that would be enough. That day he walked into the room where I had once sat with my throat going cold, and he asked the company to look at him. He explained the chain of mistakes and the incision he would make to keep the infection from spreading. He did not use warm metaphors or weather metaphors. He did not use my name. He used words like responsibility and trust and afterward. He looked tired, yes, but also like a man who had stopped borrowing courage from other people's stories. When the meeting ended, he did not search for me. He knew I was there. I left quietly and walked toward the lobby, where sunlight loosened itself across the floor, and I thought of the first morning, when the building's lights woke one at a time under my solitary footsteps. We found ourselves on a business trip we hadn't engineered, separate panels at the same industry conference, both of us wearing the knowing smiles of people who had learned to show their work without exhausting themselves. There was an elevator with bad music and a delay between floors that reminded us of how small a space between decisions can be. His shoulder brushed mine. He asked if I ever regretted opening the door that evening to a vase of roses. I said that regret wore many outfits, but none of them fit this. He exhaled as if he'd been holding that air for months. On the last night of the conference, I returned to my room to find a different kind of gift. Not flowers, not jewels, but a small cloth-bound notebook with my initials pressed into the corner and a note folded inside the front cover. It said only, "For the things you've decided not to say out loud yet." No signature, no flourish. I smiled even as my eyes stung. Time did the thing it does if you let it. It threw its weight behind quiet. Summer leaned into autumn. I met his sister at a gallery where the sculptures were made of tin roofs and string. She hugged me like someone both grateful and unsure. He met my mother when I finally agreed it was fair and necessary. My mother served him a casserole that could feed a platoon and asked not a single invasive question until he left, at which point she asked 3 and then made tea. We did not move in together. We did not make announcements in restaurants. We learned each other the way a person learns a city they intend to keep returning to. Not with a list, but with long walks and a respect for side streets. He began to sleep again. I stopped keeping my severance letter in the top drawer like proof of something. We argued twice. Once about time and once about expectation. We were imperfect and alert. We did not break. The roses he sent me that first night had dried into something hard and velvet dark on my bookshelf. A reminder that gestures can be bridges or traps depending on what you build after them. Sometimes I stood there and looked at them the way you look at the footprint of a deer you didn't actually see. Evidence that something grace-shaped had passed this way. Months later, we stood by his office window again during a late evening when most sane people had gone home. Below, the city made its private bargains with itself, lights winking out one by one. The rain had given way to an air both sharp and forgiving. He said he sometimes thought about that morning, how he had convinced himself that doing the wrong thing the right way would hurt less than facing what was right. He said that when he wrote that line in the card, he had wondered if I would shred it. He said he was glad I had not. I told him that I had considered it. I told him that every life has its burned letters, but some things you keep not because they are beautiful, but because they taught you to read yourself correctly. He placed his hand at the small of my back and did not move it higher, did not press. The warmth was enough. The elevator hummed, and somewhere down the hall someone laughed, the sound easy and unconcerned with us. He rested his forehead against the glass for a moment like a boy at a lake listening to water knock. We stood there while the office lights dimmed one by one, and our shadows lengthened and softened and finally tangled in the window's reflection. It was not triumph, what I felt. It was not vindication. It was something quieter, something that contained relief and recognition, and a kind of gratitude that felt older than we were. The city became its night self. The hum of the building insisted on its own heartbeat. When we left, we chose the stairs because the elevator would have carried us too quickly into whatever came next. On the landing, he paused, turned, and said my name. Not Ms. Anything, just the syllables the way you would say them if they belonged to you, because you had been invited to borrow them, briefly, carefully, with respect. It sounded like a future I could recognize without squinting. We descended, step by measured step, a choice instead of a rush. And the door at the bottom opened onto a street rinsed clean, ready for footprints.